pigmented dresses, and this is more common in females. Generally, this hypertrophic scar is more common in children, whereas this keloid is seen between the age group of 10 to 30 years. I told you it is going to respect the wound confines, so it remains within the wound. It remains within the wound, whereas this outgrows, this is most important, it outgrows the wound area. Outgrows the wound area. Now, what is the etiology related to hypertrophic scar? It is related to tension, and that's why it is more common over flexor aspect. It is more common over flexor aspect. Whereas I told you this keloid, the most common site is sternum. Sternum. Other sites are, this is most common, other sites are shoulder and face. Shoulder and face. Now, if we are talking about the symptoms, just you have seen that this hypertrophic scar, it is raised, its surface is raised, and sometimes there is pruritus. Sometimes there is pruritus, but it respects wound confines. Whereas in keloid, there is pain, there is pruritus, there is excessive itching around this keloid, and there is hyperesthesia. Hyperesthesia. It doesn't respect the wound confines, it goes beyond the wound margins. In pathology, one question is asked that what is the orientation of collagen in hypertrophic scar and keloid? In hypertrophic scar, there is parallel orientation of collagen fibers. Whereas in hypertrophic scar, parallel orientation in keloid, there is thick, wavy collagen, and in random orientation. So there is thick, wavy collagen in random orientation. So these are the differences between hypertrophic scar and keloid. Sometimes they are asking the image-based questions about these topics also. Now, if you see picture, in this picture, what we can see that through a specialized dressing, I'm applying the vacuum. Through a specialized dressing, if a vacuum is applied, this is known as negative pressure wound therapy, also known as vacuum-assisted closure. So this is known as negative pressure wound therapy or vacuum-assisted closure. Here, with help of specialized dressing, we are going to create the vacuum. And if we are going to create the vacuum, what happens? It is going to draw the fluid, so it draws the fluid and it increases the blood flow. So if it increases the blood flow to that area, draws the fluid, what? It helps in faster healing. Question is asked, how much is the suction pressure created or negative pressure created? The negative pressure which is created, this is very important question, it was asked many times, minus 125 mmHg. So since minus 125 mmHg of negative pressure is created, it is also known as negative pressure wound therapy. How frequently we have to change this dressing? It is generally changed 2 to 3 times per week. 2 to 3 times per week. So what are the effects of negative pressure wound therapy on wound healing? It causes micro deformation. It causes macro deformation. There is reduced edema. And there is stabilization of wound environment. So these are the 4 factors which are responsible for wound healing. These are the effects of negative pressure wound therapy, which is responsible for wound healing. Nowadays, a question is frequently asked, and it was asked last year in GPR also. What are the contraindications? What are the contraindications of negative pressure wound therapy use? So first, if there is a malignancy in the wound. Second, there is untreated, be careful, untreated osteomyelitis. There is non-enteric and unexplored fistula. And there is necrotic tissue with SR. There is presence of necrotic tissue with SR. So these are the contraindications of negative pressure wound therapy. 2 questions you have to remember: how much negative pressure is being applied? Minus 125 mmHg, and these 4 contraindications of negative pressure wound therapy. Triage. So what is the meaning of triage? Triage means to sort. Triage means to sort, and especially it is used in mass casualties. So generally, it's prioritizing victims on the basis of color coding. So there are color codes. What are those color codes? First, red. What is the meaning of this red? Red means most critically injured patient. And in this patient, immediate care is required. After that, yellow. Yellow means delayed. It means delayed. So in this particular category, there is less critically injured patient. And here, in-hospital treatment is required. Third is green. These are ambulatory patients. And here, there is no life or limb-threatening injury. So in this category, there is no life or limb-threatening injury. And black. Black means expectant treatment. Here, the patient is dead or moribund. So this is the triage. These are the color codes which are frequently asked. Now, we are going to discuss ATLS 2018 protocol for management of trauma patients. So see, ATLS 2018 protocol for trauma patients. There is primary survey and there is secondary survey. So first we are going to discuss primary survey. So what are the components of this primary survey and what we are going to do? This primary survey is aimed at detecting and simultaneously treating the immediately life-threatening injury. What are the components? The mnemonic is A, B, C, D, E. The components are A, B, C, D, E. A means airway protection. It's airway protection with cervical spine stabilization. B means breathing. It includes ventilation and oxygenation. Ventilation plus oxygenation. C means circulation. circulation with external hemorrhage control. Circulation with external hemorrhage control. D is disability. D is disability, in which we perform brief neurological examination. Brief neurological examination. And E is exposure with environmental control. Exposure with environmental control. So this is ABCDE of primary survey. One simple question. In all patients of trauma, cervical spine injury should be suspected, and that's why the first step is cervical spine stabilization. So it's actually the first step is cervical spine stabilization, followed by ABCDE. So first step is airway maintenance with cervical spine protection. So after cervical spine protection, we are going to assess the patency of airway. So how we are going to assess the patency of airway? We ask the patient's name. If patient is able to speak, it means the airway is patent. If patient is not able to speak, there are only two things. What? Either there is airway obstruction or there is CNS depression. And both of these are indications for intubation. So see, assess the patency of airway. Assess the patency of airway by asking the patient's name. If patient is not able to speak, what are the causes? Two causes only. There is airway obstruction and CNS depression. These are the causes of intubation. What are the other causes of intubation? These are the two causes. There are three other causes. So the causes or indications of intubation. So these are the two indications. The other three indications are: first, there is noisy breathing. Second, GCS less than equal to 8. And third, facial trauma. So total 3 plus these two. These are the 5 indications of intubation. So these are the 5 indications of airway management or intubation. Now 2-3 basic things. What is the definitive airway? The definitive airway is oral endotracheal intubation with cuffed endotracheal tube. Oral endotracheal intubation with cuffed endotracheal tube. Now see, what is the ATLS 2018 update? ATLS 2018 update. It recommends use of video laryngoscopy. For intubation. Now second situation, certain patients are having facial trauma or maxillofacial trauma. In cases of maxillofacial trauma, what is the emergency airway? And what is the definitive airway? Obviously, the emergency airway is needle cricothyroidotomy. It's the needle cricothyroidotomy. So that we are getting some time to insert the tracheostomy tube. So that's why definitive airway is tracheostomy. It's the tracheostomy. So this is airway. B is breathing. That includes oxygenation and ventilation. So B is breathing and it includes ventilation plus oxygenation. When airway is restored, now what we have to do? We have to see the rate and depth of respiration. So we have to perform the inspection. We see the movement of chest. We are going to perform the percussion and auscultation. On percussion, you can see whether it's hyperresonant or dull. And on auscultation, you want to check whether there is presence of breath signs or there is absence of breath signs. Now 2-3 simple situations. Now let's see example of tension pneumothorax. In cases of tension pneumothorax, patient will be having dyspnea, tachypnea. On percussion, there will be hyperresonance on affected side and there is absent breath sounds. Imagine if a patient is having hemothorax, massive hemothorax. In that case, what will happen? There is dull note on percussion and absent breath sounds. So in this, we are going to assess the rate and depth of respiration. We have to perform percussion and we have to perform the auscultation. Here, the ventilation problems. What are the causes? What are the causes of ventilation problems? There are 3 major causes of ventilation problems. First, tension pneumothorax. Second, massive hemothorax. And third, severe pulmonary contusion. Now you know, if the patient is having tension pneumothorax on the basis of suspicion only, we have to put a large bore needle into second intercostal space in mid-clavicular line. After that, we have to insert ICD, intercostal drain, in fifth intercostal space in the triangle of safety. But according to ATLS 2018 update, what is the recommendation in adults only? There is recommendation in adults only that at the place of second intercostal space, it is suggested that put the wide bore needle in fifth intercostal space. Slightly anterior to mid-axillary line. Be careful, it is suggested. But still, if it's asked in exam that what is the next best step on the basis of suspicion of tension pneumothorax, you have to put the needle in second intercostal space until and unless in question it's mentioned that according to ATLS 2018. So I'm repeating, according to 2018 ATLS update, it is suggested that the wide bore needle in adults should be inserted in fifth intercostal space slightly anterior to mid-axillary line. For massive hemothorax, what we have to go for? ICD insertion. And for severe pulmonary contusion, we have to go for mechanical ventilation. Now see, circulation with hemorrhage control. So here we have to rule out the shock in the patient. So rule out shock. How we can rule out? Assess the vitals. So we are going to assess the pulse rate and BP. If pulse rate is more than 100 per minute and systolic blood pressure is less than 100 mmHg, it is suggestive of shock or unstable vitals. So unstable vital means pulse rate more than 100 per minute, BP less than 100 per minute, less than 100 mmHg, systolic BP. Now, any patient who is coming to you with shock and the cause is trauma, what is the cause of shock? It's the blood loss. So basically, it's the hypovolemic shock because of blood loss. In these patients, what we have to do, put two large bore IV cannula, which one? This was asked in names, green cannula, send the blood for cross match. Initially, it was said that warm crystalloids should be given in adults 1 to 2 liters, but according to ATLS 2018 update, at the place of 1 to 2 liters, we are giving only 1 liter of crystalloids. So according to ATLS 2018 update, how much fluid we have to give? Only 1 liter, of warm isotonic crystalloids, in adults. And what about children? In children, weight less than 40 kg. We have to give 20 ml per kg of warm isotonic crystalloids. Now question, there is blood loss. What are the causes of blood loss? There is a mnemonic, either on the floor or 4 more. So either there is external blood loss, on the floor means external blood loss, and 4 more. What are the other sides? First, thorax. Second, abdomen. Third, retroperitoneum because of pelvic fracture. And fourth, long bone fractures. Multiple long bone fractures. So these are the causes of blood loss. Now how you are going to assess the thorax? For thorax, we can go for chest X-ray. For abdomen, we perform fast, and for pelvic fracture, X-ray pelvis, AP view. So one question is asked, what are the two most important X-rays? In the patients of trauma? Is the chest X-ray and X-ray pelvis AP view. Whenever we are resuscitating the patient, simultaneously we are assessing the shock also. If the patient is not improving, in those patients what we have to go for? Blood transfusion. So what is the trauma transfusion protocol? The trauma transfusion protocol. According to trauma transfusion protocol, we give Paxil, plasma and platelets. In the ratio of 1:1:1. This question is continuously being asked from last 3 to 4 years. Continuously. Trauma transfusion protocol. After that, one general question. What's the best clinical indicator of tissue perfusion? And we discussed already. It's the urine output. Now second question. What is the best indicator to determine? The amount of fluid required. And that is CBP. So these are the questions. This is how we are going to monitor. There is one latest update about CRASH 2 trial. In this CRASH 2 trial, use of tranexamic acid. This is for use of tranexamic acid in hypotensive trauma patients. So I told you, what is the most common cause of hypotension in trauma patient? It is the hypovolemia because of blood loss. It is used in both this tranexamic acid. It is going to decrease the mortality from bleeding in both blunt and penetrating trauma. The question which will be asked, it will be about the dose. So how much dose is given? We give 1 gram IV over 10 minutes, followed by 1 gram IV over 8 hours. 1 gram IV over 10 minutes, followed by 1 gram IV over 8 hours. And it should be given within 3 hours of injury. It should be administered or given within 3 hours. So it should be given within 3 hours of injury. These are the probable questions about CRASH 2 trial. Now D is disability. Here we perform brief neurological examination. Now in this brief neurological examination, what we are going to assess? We are going to assess the Glasgow Coma Scale, and we want to assess the pupils. So here we assess GCS and the pupils. What we see in the pupils? Size, reaction, and equality. There is revised GCS, which is frequently being asked in AIMS, and this revised GCS was revised in 2014. We are going to discuss this revised GCS of 2014. So see this revised Glasgow Coma Scale, which was revised in 2014. So there are 3 components. First, eye opening. If it is spontaneous, what is the score? 4. If it is to speech, the score is 3. If it is to pressure, it is 2, and there is no opening, so none, 1. After that, second is verbal response. Now see, if patient appears oriented, the score is 5. Patient is confused, in that 4. Patient is speaking some words, 3. Producing some incomprehensible sounds, 2. And none is 1. Third is best motor response. And be careful, is the best parameter to predict the survival. So it's the best predictor of outcome. Is best motor response. Here, obeying commands. Score is 6. Localizing pain is 5. Normal flexion or withdrawal of pain. 4. There is abnormal flexion. It's 3. Extension. It's 2. And no response or none. It's 1. So here you can see, this is E, this is V, this is M. So E maximum is 4, E maximum is 5, M 6. So what is the maximum GCS? It is the maximum score is 15. And what is the minimum score? E1, V1, M1. So minimum score is 3. Now see one hypothetical situation. Similar questions were asked in AIMS. Imagine if a patient is having trauma and this trauma patient was brought to emergency. At the time of presentation, the patient was having spontaneous eye opening, but patient was having tracheostomy. There was tracheostomy and patient was localizing the pain in left upper limb, not able to move the right upper limb. So first, spontaneous eye opening means score is 4. This patient is having tracheostomy. So what verbal response is? Non-testable. Verbal response is non-testable. And in right upper limb, patient is not able to move the limb. Might be because of fracture. But best motor response. So in left upper limb, since patient is localizing pain, it is 5. So what will be the score? You can see E4, VNT, M5. So the total score is 9, VNT. VNT means non-testable. Initially, it was said that for a non-testable parameter, additional score of 1 should be given and it should be added in the final score. Nowadays, it is not followed. So we are not going to add an additional score of 1. So if in exam, the options are 9, 10, 11, 12, what we have to mark? 9. And if it is 9 VNT, this one is better option. So these are the latest updates. There is certain other modifications. GCSP. What is GCSP? It is GCS minus P means pupil reactivity score. Pupil reactivity score. What is this pupil reactivity score? It's the number of pupils non-reactive to light. Means pupils non-reactive to light. If both pupils are non-reactive to light, the score is 2. If only one pupil, score is 1. And if none pupil is non-reactive to light, it is 0. So if you see, the pupillary reactivity score, maximum is 2 and the minimum is 0. So if you see, Glasgow Coma Scale, maximum is 15, minimum is 3. So see, GCSP, maximum score will be 15 minus 0. 15 and the minimum score will be 3 minus 2 plus 1. So here you can see that GCSP varies from 1 to 15 whereas GCS varies from 3 to 15. These are the potential questions. Next is GCS PACT. What are the components of GCS PACT? First, Glasgow Coma Scale, P, pupils. Third, A means age, and fourth, CT. So these are the 4 components of GCS PACT. This is very, very important, and from last 2 years, these kind of questions are frequently asked in AIMS. Now, E is exposure with environmental control. So here what we do, we expose the patient and we prevent hypothermia. Expose the patient and prevent hypothermia. So how we are going to prevent the hypothermia? So we have to keep the patient warm by warm blankets, pre-warmed IV fluids, infusion of pre-warmed IV fluids, use of blowers or body warmers. So this is A, B, C, D, E. That is the primary survey of ATLS. After that, what is secondary survey? In the secondary survey, there is head to toe systemic examination to rule out non-life threatening injuries, and it's the sequential assessment from head to toe. So what is the first step? Examination of head and face. Examination of head and face to rule out fracture and laceration. To rule out fracture and laceration. Second, examination of neck to rule out neck injuries. To rule out neck injuries. After that, examination of chest to rule out rib fractures. After that, examination of abdomen to rule out intra-abdominal organ injuries. Intra-abdominal organ injuries. Simultaneously, we have to insert nasogastric tube in patients with maxillofacial trauma. In patients with maxillofacial trauma, we insert orogastric tube. Check meatus for presence of blood. Check meatus. If there is no blood, means there is no urethral injury, very low chance, then we go for Foley's catheterization. After that, fifth is examination of back. And examination of back is known as log roll. Question is asked, what is the ideal number of people for log roll and what is the minimum number of people? Ideal number is 5 and the minimum number is 4. Ideal number is 5, minimum number is 4. During examination of back, digital rectal examination is performed. So we perform digital rectal examination. After that, sixth is extremities. So what? We have to look in the extremities. Look for deformity, crepitus, and abnormal movement. What we want to rule out? We want to rule out fracture. And what is the seventh step? Neurological examination. So here we perform, or here we repeat the GCS. Re-evaluate pupils, and look for signs of cord injury. So this is the secondary survey. After that, lots of questions are asked about trauma scoring system. First is revised trauma score. What are the components of revised trauma score? The mnemonic is GP road. Don't go to this road. G means Glasgow Coma Scale. B means blood pressure. Which one? Systolic. And road means respiratory rate. So these are the 3 components of revised trauma score. After that, second is TRIS. What is the full form of TRIS? It's the trauma and injury severity score. Here, what is the mnemonic? The mnemonic is injury severity score plus RAM. R means revised trauma score. A means age and M means mechanism. age, mechanism. So these are the four components of TRIS. After that, the third one is MES. Third is MES. What is the full form? Mangled extremity, severity, mangled extremity, severity score. And what are the components? Mnemonic is ELISA. It's the ELISA. E, energy. It's the energy. Li, limb ischemia. S, shock and age. So these are the trauma scoring system. These are frequently asked in exam. You have to remember trauma, triad of death. So what are the components of trauma, triad of death? This is very important. Trauma, triad of death. There are three components. First, there is hypothermia. There is coagulopathy and metabolic acidosis. So these are the components. Out of these three components, which one is most commonly responsible for death? Out of these three components, coagulopathy is most commonly responsible for death. Now, initially, when unstable patient of trauma was brought to emergency, initially approximately 30 to 50 years back, long duration surgery was performed. But what the prognosis of that surgery was very poor. Why? Because after performing long duration surgery, this trauma, triad of death, these three components, this is a vicious cycle, and there was strengthening of this vicious cycle, leading to increase in mortality. That's why nowadays, in unstable patients, we are going to follow damage control surgery. So what is damage control surgery? Damage control surgery is also known as abbreviated laparotomy. It is also known as abbreviated laparotomy. Now, what we do in this case, when unstable patient is brought to our emergency, we perform exploratory laparotomy. In phase 1, we control hemorrhage and contamination. After that, we shift the patient to ICU, and we are going to correct the underlying problem like hypothermia, coagulopathy, metabolic acidosis. After resuscitation for 48 hours, again we take the patient back to OT and we perform the definitive operation. So, what are the phases of damage control surgery? Phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 1, this is the initial exploration. Initial exploration. In this, we are going to control hemorrhage and contamination. Control hemorrhage and contamination. So whenever some bleeding is there, either we are going to ligate the vessel, or if we are not able to localize the bleeding, we can pack the abdomen. If there is some kind of perforation, we are going to perform the stapling of that perforation and isolation. So we are going to control the contamination. After that, in phase 2, this is also known as secondary resuscitation. Phase 2 is secondary resuscitation. Here, shift the patient to ICU for 48 hours. Shift the patient to ICU for 48 hours, correct? Hypothermia, correct? Hypothermia, coagulopathy, and metabolic acidosis. After correction of these three conditions or after secondary resuscitation, we are going for phase 3. And this phase 3 is definitive operation. This is definitive operation. So here we perform the planned re-exploration and there is definitive repair. So this is planned re-exploration and definitive repair. Now how to remember? Suppose you perform the packing of abdomen because of bleeding. Remove the pack, try to localize the bleeding vessel and ligate it or repair it. Second, if there is perforation, we have two options. We have to resect that part of perforated segment of the bowel and we have to perform end-to-end anastomosis, or we have to go for stoma formation. Be careful. In these patients, stoma formation is preferred over complex anastomosis. So in these patients, stoma formation is preferred over complex GI anastomosis. Complex GI anastomosis. These are three phases. In AIMS, there was one question about stages of damage control surgery. There are 5 stages. 3 phases, 5 stages. What are the stages of damage control surgery? Now first, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now see what are these stages? Stage 1 is patient selection. So we have to select patient. Which patient will be taken for this damage control surgery? Stage 2 is operative control of hemorrhage. Operative control of hemorrhage and contamination. Hemorrhage and contamination. Be careful, this was phase 1. After that, stage 3 is ICU resuscitation. Stage 4 is definitive surgery. And stage 5 is abdominal closure. These are the 5 stages of damage control surgery. You can easily remember what? Here, this is phase 1, this is phase 2, this is phase 3. The stage 1 is patient selection and stage 5 is what? Abdominal closure. Second very important topic is abdominal compartment syndrome, which is frequently asked in NEET, TMT and PGI. Now first, what is the definition of abdominal compartment syndrome? So in this case of abdominal compartment syndrome, there is increased intra-abdominal pressure. How much? More than 20. Apart from increased intra-abdominal pressure, because of this increased intra-abdominal pressure, there are fatal complications. What are the causes of fatal complications? Due to pulmonary failure and mesenteric vascular compromise. So it is characterized by increased intra-abdominal pressure that is more than 20 mmHg, resulting into fatal complications because of pulmonary failure and mesenteric vascular compromise. It's very easy to remember. Imagine if a patient of trauma is resuscitated vigorously and there is excessive collection of fluid in the peritoneal cavity, or there is hemoperitoneum. Because of excessive collection of fluid in the peritoneal cavity, there is increased intra-abdominal pressure. Because of this increased intra-abdominal pressure, there are physiological consequences. What are those consequences? It's very easy to remember. Because of increased intra-abdominal pressure, see the physiological consequences. So obviously, there is decreased venous return, there is decreased cardiac output. Because of decreased cardiac output, there is decreased renal blood flow, and there is decreased visceral blood flow. Because of that, there is mesenteric vascular compromise. If there is decreased renal blood flow, there is decreased GFR and there is decreased urine output. These are the physiological consequences which are decreased. What are the physiological parameters which are increased? There is increased heart rate, increased pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, increased central venous pressure, increased systemic vascular resistance. Increased systemic vascular resistance. Now, how we are going to measure the intra-abdominal pressure? The gold standard method is by, how we are going to diagnose? By urinary bladder catheter. Urinary bladder catheter. This is the gold standard method. Gold standard method used to measure intra-abdominal pressure. Frequently, the question is asked about grading of abdominal compartment syndrome. So, see, grading on the basis of intra-abdominal pressure. Grade 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, see, what is the bladder pressure in mmHg? I told you the gold standard method is urinary bladder catheter. So, how much bladder pressure? So, the bladder pressure in mmHg. This pressure is in mmHg. Now, what are the clinical findings and how we are going to treat? In grade 1, the pressure is 12 to 15 mmHg. And what are the clinical findings? There are no clinical findings. And how we are going to resuscitate the patient? Normovolemic resuscitation. We go for normovolemic resuscitation. After that, grade 2. Grade 2 is 16 to 20. Grade 3 is 21 to 25. And grade 4 is more than 25 mmHg. Now see the clinical findings in grade 2. In grade 2, there is oliguria. There is splanchnic hypoperfusion. Splanchnic hypoperfusion. I told you in grade 1 we go for normovolemic resuscitation. In grade 2 we go for hypovolemic. Here we go for hypovolemic resuscitation. Now grade 3, 21 to 25 mmHg is the bladder pressure. Here the patient is having anuria. There is increased ventilation pressure. Increased ventilation pressure. And in this case, what we have to go for? We have to go for decompression. In grade 3, we have to go for decompression. And about grade 4, here there is anuria, there is increased ventilation pressure. But additional is, apart from these two, there is decreased PO2. And here, emergency re-exploration should be done. So we have to go for emergency re-exploration. So these are the gradings, and this is how we are going to manage the patient of abdominal compartment syndrome. Now we are going to discuss neck injuries. First question is asked that what are the two most important anatomical landmarks in neck injuries? The two most important anatomical landmarks in neck injuries are sternocleidomastoid muscle and platysma. It's the platysma and sternocleidomastoid muscle. After that, questions are asked about the zones. Questions are asked about the horizontal zones of neck injuries. So there are 3 zones in the neck injuries. Now see the zones of neck injury. This is what? This is the suprasternal notch. This is the cricoid cartilage. This is the angle of mandible, and this is the base of skull. Now, this is zone 1 between suprasternal notch and cricoid cartilage. This is the zone 2 between cricoid cartilage and angle of mandible, and this is the zone 3 between angle of mandible to the base of skull. Important question: out of 3 zones, which zone injuries are fatal? Where the carotid vessels, trachea, and esophagus is most superficial. So it's the zone 1. So in the zone 1, carotid artery, trachea, esophagus, trachea, carotid artery, esophagus. These are most superficial, and these injuries are fatal. So question: in zone 1, these injuries are fatal. Why? Because trachea, esophagus, and carotid vessels. These are superficial. Now we are going to discuss the thoracic injuries. Questions are asked that what is the most common cause of death? Most common cause of death in blunt thoracic injury is the tracheobronchial trauma. So first question: most common cause of death in blunt thoracic trauma. Blunt thoracic trauma, and that is tracheobronchial injury. This question was asked in a latest exam. Second question: what is the most common cause of mortality in the penetrating thoracic trauma? It is the hemothorax. Most common cause of death in penetrating thoracic trauma, and that is hemothorax. What is the cause of this hemothorax? Because of pulmonary laceration. Third question: what is the most common thoracic injury? The most common thoracic injuries are chest wall injuries. These are chest wall injuries. Questions are asked about rib fracture. So what is the most commonly fractured rib during CPR? So during CPR, most commonly, questions are frequently asked about rib fracture. So what is most common rib fracture during CPR? So the most common rib fracture in CPR, and that is 4th to 6th rib. So it's the 4th to 6th rib. After that, definition of flail chest is asked frequently. So what is flail chest? So first question: what is the definition of flail chest? It's the fracture of 2 or more than 2 consecutive ribs fractured at 2 or more than 2 places. This is according to ATLS 2018 definition, and this has been changed in most of the textbooks also. So the definition: it is the fracture of 2 or more than 2, be careful, consecutive ribs at 2 or more than 2 places. In this case, here you can see this is a flail segment, and this is the isolated segment of chest wall. This is also known as paradoxical respiration. Why? Because this flail segment moves out when the thoracic cavity moves in. So it is characterized by painful. It is characterized by painful breathing, shallow breathing, increased work of breathing, and paradoxical respiration. Paradoxical respiration. And because of all these things, what's the problem? There is increased risk of respiratory failure. increased risk of respiratory failure. But be careful, all patients are not having respiratory failure. It increases the risk of respiratory failure. How we are going to confirm the diagnosis? It is diagnosed clinically. So diagnosed clinically. Now how we are going to diagnose it clinically? We are asking the patient to cough. When patient is going to cough, what? This isolated part of chest wall moves out because the thoracic cavity moves in. Or we have to observe the patient for multiple respiratory cycles. Be careful, it is not diagnosed by chest X-ray. It is usually diagnosed clinically. Treatment depends whether patient is having only flail chest or patient is having flail chest with respiratory failure. So if the patient is just having flail chest, if the patient is having only flail chest, in this case we have to go for oxygen, supplemental oxygen plus analgesia. This analgesia can be in the form of epidural analgesia also. If patient pain is not relieved, epidural analgesia plus physiotherapy. Plus physiotherapy. Second situation, see if the patient is having flail chest with respiratory failure. Flail chest with respiratory failure. In this case, we go for intermittent positive pressure ventilation. So this is a very common mistake done by most of the students. Question is asked, what's the treatment of flail chest? And in option, two options are there. Analgesia, second option, strapping, third option, intermittent positive pressure ventilation. What is the correct answer? It is the adequate analgesia. Until and unless patient is not having respiratory failure, you will not mark intermittent positive pressure ventilation. So this is how we manage flail chest. Next is very important. This topic is asked almost every year in AIMS. Every year in AIMS. That is tension pneumothorax. Now what is the cause of this tension pneumothorax? It is caused by formation of air sucking wound. Formation of air sucking wound or unidirectional valve. Unidirectional valve or one-way valve. It can be caused by causes. It can be caused by blunt trauma, penetrating trauma, blunt trauma, penetrating trauma, positive pressure ventilation, and during central line insertion. Central line insertion. Generally, it is caused by anesthetic during central line insertion. Now, what will happen in tension pneumothorax? Have a look. So, in this case, what you can see that in this pleural space, there is collection of air, and this air is collected under tension. Because of this, what will happen? The affected lung or affected. Now, see what is the problem in tension pneumothorax? There is air in the pleural space, and this air is collected under tension. What will happen? Since there is formation of unidirectional valve, this collected air is going to compress the affected lung, and because of that, patient will be having what? Dyspnea, tachypnea. Because of air here, if you want to perform the percussion, there is hyperresonance, and if you are performing the auscultation, what happens? There is absence of breath sound. There is distended neck veins. So these are the clinical findings. So clinical findings in tension pneumothorax, there is dyspnea, there is tachypnea, there is distended neck veins, distended neck veins, and if you perform the percussion, on percussion there is hyperresonance over affected hemithorax, hyperresonance over affected hemithorax, and on auscultation there is absence of breath sounds. Absence of breath sounds. Question is asked, if similar findings are there is cardiac tamponade also. But what happens? Dyspnea, tachypnea is not that marked. There is no hyperresonance and what? No absence of breath sounds, but distended neck veins is there. So I'll discuss it separately. So these are the clinical findings of tension pneumothorax. Be careful. Diagnosis of flail chest and tension pneumothorax is made clinically. It's a clinical diagnosis, and on the basis of suspicion, immediately what you have to insert a large bore or wide bore needle into second intercostal space in mid-clavicular line, which buys you some time to insert the chest tube in triangle of safety. So see the management. Diagnosed clinically. You have to remember it's diagnosed clinically. Management. Put a wide bore needle into second intercostal space in mid-clavicular line. And what is the treatment of choice? The treatment of choice is ICT insertion. ICT insertion in triangle of safety. In triangle of safety. In fifth intercostal space. In fifth intercostal space. Questions are asked, what are the boundaries of triangle of safety? So the boundaries are anteriorly the lateral border of pectoralis major, posteriorly the lateral border of latissimus dorsi, base by a line passing through fifth intercostal space, and apex is the base of axilla. Apex is the base of axilla. So you can see anteriorly lateral border of pectoralis major, posteriorly lateral border of latissimus dorsi, superiorly apex by base of axilla, and the base by line passing through fifth intercostal space. Now there is one ATLS update about tension pneumothorax. Usually replace large bore needle in second intercostal space in mid-clavicular line, followed by ICD insertion in triangle of safety. But see, ATLS update 2018 says recent evidences support. Be careful. Recent evidences support insertion of wide bore needle in fifth intercostal space, slightly anterior to mid-axillary line in adults. So if in the question specifically it is asked that what is ATLS 2018 update about tension pneumothorax, then only you will mark this that the wide bore needle should be inserted in fifth intercostal space. If it is not mentioned, you will mark second intercostal space. And this question was asked in AIMS May 2019, and the correct answer was in second intercostal space. So this is the ATLS update. So you have to read the question carefully. If a child is there, in child, the wide bore needle should be inserted only in the second intercostal space in the mid-clavicular line. Next is pericardial tamponade. These two questions are frequently asked. Pericardial tamponade. So rapid accumulation of fluid in pericardial space can lead to pericardial tamponade. Question is asked, it is characterized by a triad. What's that triad? Blake's triad. How to remember this Blake's triad? The mnemonic is MDH. It's MDH. M, muffled hard sound. It's the muffled hard sound. D, distended neck veins. Distended neck veins. And H, hypotension. H, hypotension. If you perform X-ray, you can see that there is enlarged cardiac shadow. On X-ray, there is enlarged cardiac shadow. But be careful, the investigation of choice is echo. Echocardiography. The investigation of choice for diagnosis is echocardiography. Now there is emergency treatment. What we have to insert a needle and aspirate the fluid, known as needle pericardiocentesis. And what is the treatment of choice? It's the pericardiotomy. Surgical pericardiotomy. So say the treatment. There is emergency treatment. And what's that emergency treatment? It's the needle pericardiocentesis. Needle pericardiocentesis. And what's the treatment of choice? It's the surgical pericardiotomy and drainage of fluid. It's the surgical pericardiotomy. So here you can see that there is muffled heart sound, distended neck veins, hypotension. In tension pneumothorax, there was dyspnea tachypnea, there was hyperresonance or affected hemithorax and absent breath sounds. These are the findings by which you can easily differentiate the pericardial tamponade from tension pneumothorax. After that, question is asked about blast injury. What is the most commonly injured and what is the most severely injured? There are two types of blast, air blast and water blast. So in air blast, most commonly injured, it's tympanic membrane, and most severely injured, that is lungs. Now, in water blast, there are two situations. One, in which the head is submerged in the water, and second, when head is out. If the head is out, tympanic membrane is not going to receive the pressure waves. In that case, most commonly and most severely injured is GIT. But if the head is submerged, most commonly injured is tympanic membrane, and most severely injured is GIT. So, two questions. In underwater blast, when head is out of water, most commonly and most severely injured is GIT. When head is submerged, in this case, most commonly injured is tympanic membrane, and most severely injured, that is GIT. These are one-liner questions frequently asked about blast injury. After that, in trauma, the questions are asked: if a patient is having musculoskeletal injury, what is the sequence of repair of various structure? So how you have to remember? There is a mnemonic: B, fan of veins. So sequence of repair: first, bone; second, extensor tendon; bone; second, extensor tendon; third, flexor tendon; fourth, artery; fifth, nerve; sixth, vein; and last is skin. This is the sequence of repair of various structures in musculoskeletal injury. So these are the important topics related to trauma. Now we are going to discuss abdominal trauma. So first question: what is the most commonly injured organ in blunt trauma abdomen? Most commonly injured organ in blunt trauma abdomen, and that is spleen followed by liver. Second question: most commonly injured organ in penetrating trauma abdomen. Most commonly injured organ in penetrating trauma. Be careful. Initially it was small intestine. Nowadays it is liver followed by stomach, followed by small intestine. So this is the change. Next, most commonly injured organ in gunshot wound. Most commonly injured organ in gunshot wound, and that is small intestine. This is same, small intestine. What is the most commonly injured bowel? In blunt trauma abdomen. That should be mobile as well as fixed. It's the jejunum. What is the most commonly injured structure in seatbelt injury? Most commonly injured structure in seatbelt injury. And that is mesentery. It's the mesentery. What is the first investigation done in patients of blunt trauma abdomen? The first investigation done in blunt trauma abdomen patients, both stable as well as unstable, and that is fast. Next question: the gold standard investigation for, be careful, stable patients of blunt trauma abdomen, and that is CCT. Fast is very, very important, very hot topic. Have a look. Fast. What is the full form? It is focused assessment with sonography for trauma. It's the first investigation done in blunt trauma abdomen patient. Fast is nothing. It's ultrasound, which is done very fast. It is performed within 2 to 4 minutes. Fast is performed within 2 to 4 minutes. So here you can see what we are going to assess. We are going to assess first pericardial sac. And for assessment of pericardial sac, we place the probe in subxiphoid region. So this is subxiphoid transverse view for pericardial sac. The second is right upper quadrant longitudinal view for perihepatic region. This is 3. This is left upper quadrant longitudinal view. This is for perisplenic region. And this is 4th. This is for pelvis. In this particular region, there is suprapubic longitudinal and transverse view. So it is performed in this sequence. Can you see? 1, 2, 3, 4. So in fast, how many views? 4 views. How many regions are assessed? 4. Pericardial sac, perihepatic region, perisplenic region, and pelvis. There is one condition known as E-fast. E-fast means extended fast. Extended fast means we are going to assess the right thoracic as well as left thoracic view. So this is 5th, this is 6th. So in E-fast, there are 6 views. Right thoracic and left thoracic view. And on pneumothorax, on E-fast, there is barcode sign, also known as stratosphere sign. So this is seen on E-fast. Fast has replaced DPL. FAST has replaced DPL. So what is this DPL? This is diagnostic peritoneal lavage. It's the diagnostic peritoneal lavage. Diagnostic peritoneal lavage. Now question is asked, DPL is considered positive. What is positive DPL? Positive DPL means when more than 10 ml of gross blood is aspirated. Gross blood is aspirated from peritoneal cavity or the returned effluent contains RBCs, how much? More than 1 lakh per mm cube. WBCs, more than 500 per mm cube. Demonstrable bile or bacteria. Demonstrable bile or bacteria. Or amylase. Amylase is more than 174 international units per deciliter. So these are findings which are suggestive of positive DPL. Now let me tell you one simple concept. Fast and DPL are positive only in two situations. Either there is hemorrhage or there is contamination or perforation. So there is either hemorrhage or perforation. Only in these two situations, the fast and DPL is positive. And whenever fast is positive, we have to confirm the findings by CCT if patient is stable. Now see how we are going to manage the blunt trauma abdomen patient if the patient is having liver trauma and if the patient is having splenic trauma. So now see, there is blunt trauma abdomen and suppose the patient is having splenic trauma. Splenic trauma. There are two situations in this. Either the patient is unstable or the patient is stable. If either the patient is unstable or stable, in both of these situations, what we have to perform? The fast. If the patient is unstable, obviously this fast will be positive. And since the fast is positive and the patient is unstable, what we have to go for? Exploratory laparotony. We have to go for exploratory laparotony. Now see, fast is done if it's negative. If it's negative, what is done? Observation. And if fast is positive, we have to confirm the findings by CCT. So CCT is performed for confirmation of findings. Now see, in this, there are three situations. First, if the patient is having grade 1 and grade 2 injury, or patient is having grade 3 injury, or patient is having grade 4 or 5. Now, one simple question is there. If the patient is having grade 4 or grade 5 injury, in these cases, what we have to perform the splenectomy. We have to perform the exploratory laparotony. So, generally, in these patients, we perform exploratory laparotony plus splenectomy because there is significant injury to the spleen. Generally. Now, if there is grade 3 injury or grade 1 and 2 injury, in these cases, the patient is having pseudoaneurysm. Patient is having pseudoaneurysm. There is contrast blush, and there is moderate bleed. In these cases, we can go for angioembolization. Now suppose if it is failed or patient is having hemodynamically instability. There is hemodynamic instability or patient developed peritonitis. In these situations, what we have to go for? Obviously, exploratory laparotony plus splenectomy. In grade 1 and 2, we can go for what? Observation. If the patient is not having grade 3 also, if the patient is not having pseudoaneurysm, contrast blush or moderate bleed, and after that, we have to repeat the scan after 72 hours. Repeat scan after 72 hours. Now I want to tell you certain basics. Whenever we are performing the fast is positive, it means there is either bleeding or perforation. If fast is positive and patient is stable, we have to confirm finding with CT. Now, whenever there is positive fast, it means there is collection of blood or collection of fluid. Whenever we perform CCT, contrast enhanced CT, if there is ongoing or active bleeding, you can easily see the extravasation of contrast. That can be managed by angioembolization, and if it's not available or failed, we can go forward exploratory laparotony. So this is how we manage the patients of splenic trauma. Now, liver trauma, blunt trauma abdomen involving liver. Similar protocol is there. Two situations: either the patient is unstable, or the patient is stable. In both of these situations, we perform what? Fast. Here, the fast will be positive, and what? Exploratory laparotony is performed. Exploratory laparotony. In stable patients, again, we have to perform fast. It can be negative, in that case, observation, and if it is positive, confirm the findings by CCT. So we perform. Now on CT, there are two situations. Either the patient is having grade 1 to 3 trauma. Grade 1 to 3. In these cases, we can go for observation. If there is contrast blush, in these cases, we have to go for angioembolization. Second situation, the patient is having grade 4 and 5 injury. Grade 4 and 5. In these situations, generally what we have to go for? Exploratory laparotony. And whenever this angioembolization is not available or failed, in that case, we go for exploratory laparotony. So this is how we manage the patients of blunt trauma to the liver. Now, one basic difference is there. Generally, in splenic trauma, the bleeding is arterial. That's why if the patient is having significant injury, we perform splenectomy. But in liver trauma, bleeding is usually venous. That's why packing is effective. In majority of cases, we perform the conservative surgery where liver is generally saved. The part of liver injured is generally saved. So this is the basic difference between liver trauma and splenic trauma. Next is penetrating trauma. So in penetrating trauma, it can be of two types. First, gunshot, and second is stab wound. One simple question: exploratory laparotony is mandatory in gunshot. Exploratory laparotony is mandatory. It's mandatory in gunshot. So we have to perform the exploratory laparotony. The stab wound, it can be either anterior stab wound, or it can be flank or back wound. So whenever there is backstabbing or back wound, in these cases, there is increased risk of increased risk of injury of colon, kidney, and ureter. That's why here we have to perform CECT with triple contrast, IV, oral, and rectal. So here, CECT with triple contrast is performed, IV, oral, and rectal. Now what is the management protocol of penetrating trauma? Have a look. Penetrating trauma. Now, there are two categories, either gunshot or anterior stab wound. So if there is gunshot wound, I told you what is mandatory, exploratory laparotomy. So we have to go for exploratory laparotomy. There is anterior stab wound. Anterior stab wound. In this particular category, if the patient is having shock, peritonitis, or evisceration, in all these cases, what we have to go for exploratory laparotomy. If these are absent, then we have to go for local wound exploration. What we want to see whether there is peritoneal breach or not. We have to look for peritoneal breach. If it's absent, what we have to go for wound closure, and discharge. And if it's present, we have to rule out intra-abdominal organ injury because there is peritoneal breach. So which investigation is performed? We have to perform CCT. If CCT is positive, what we have to go for? Observation. Generally, we perform serial physical examination and hemoglobin every 8 hourly. And what are the findings? The findings are patient is unstable. Patient became unstable. There is decrease in hemoglobin. How much? More than 3 gram per deciliter. Or patient developed leukocytosis. If these findings are present, we go for exploratory laparotomy. And if these findings are absent, we go for the wound closure. And the discharge. So this is how we manage the patients of penetrating trauma. Here what you have to remember, in anterior stab wound, first explore the wound if the patient is stable. If peritoneal breach is there, we have to rule out significant intra-abdominal organ injury, perform CCT. If it's negative, we can go for wound closure and discharge. But if it's positive, simultaneously patient became unstable, there is leukocytosis, hemoglobin decreased more than 3 gram per deciliter, we have to perform exploratory laparotomy. So this is how we manage the patients of penetrating trauma. Now we are going to discuss shock. So what is this shock? This is clinical syndrome. It's the clinical syndrome resulting from